Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Robert Kelly. I'm here as General Counsel for Convention of States Action. We are a nationwide grassroots nonprofit organization that has over 4.8 million supporters across the country, many of whom you've just heard from here in the state. I don't really think I can improve upon the testimony that they've already given, other than just to emphasize that this piece of legislation is one that enjoys bipartisan support across this country. Majorities of both Republicans and Democrats support this piece of legislation in every state where it's being run. It's currently being run in 20 other states right now, and it has passed in 15 states across this country. The purpose of this legislation is to give people a seat at the table and to be able to speak to their politicians in Washington, D.C. Majorities of both Republicans and Democrats believe that you as state legislatures do a better job representing them than their congressional representatives up in Washington, D.C. And really, that should be no surprise, since you are closer to the people that you represent. I encourage all of you to adopt this, to pass this resolution out of committee and to support the will of your constituents here in the state. With that, I open it up to any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this group? I see a hand raised by Delegate McComas.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is for Mr. Kelly or Mr. Patton. Okay. This is a national effort. What states have signed on to this at this point? I think it was mentioned for this group. States have passed it.
Sure. Yes, Delegate McComas, I'm happy to list out the states. This has been adopted in 15 states so far. Those states are Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Utah, and Tennessee, as well as Texas.
Thank you. The other question I have is, okay, there's been a real concern over the years that an Article 5 convention would not be limited. And as basically, I think there's a concern that we would literally upend and rewrite the Constitution. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think there's no substantial risk of a convention running away or somehow rewriting the Constitution. This application here invokes the the legislative authority that this legislature has under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. And Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution specifically says that the legislature has the ability to apply for a convention for proposing amendments. And I think both of those words are critically important to understand. First, the convention only has the ability to propose. That is to say, it's essentially a drafting committee. It can come up with a proposal for limiting the power of the federal government, a proposal for term limits on members of Congress, a proposal for fiscal restraints on the federal government. But what it cannot do is enact any of that. Article 5 explicitly states that 3/4 of the states are required to ratify any proposal that comes out of the convention, which is exactly the same requirement that is imposed on Congress itself. And of course, this is an incredibly high burden. It means merely one house in 13 states could defeat any proposal. So the only kind of proposal that you're ever going to see successfully come out of a convention is one that enjoys overwhelming bipartisan support of the American people. Something like term limits that consistently enjoys 80 to 90%, something like a balanced budget amendment, or something that restrains the ability of the federal government to spend above the revenue that it generates, that enjoys consistently 60 to 70% of the American people, and something that curtails federal abuses of powers in other areas. 67% of the American people believe the federal government is too large and tries to do too much. So those are the types of areas that amendments could reasonably be adopted on. There's no realistic chance of an amendment being adopted in another area.
So let me just, so the mechanics would be that the convention of this, who would basically walk through the mechanics of it, like who gets chosen to go to the convention, where was the convention held, and then after the list of bills have been drafted, or the issues have been drafted and submitted to the different legislatures, both houses would have to approve the bill, and then it would be given to the governor to sign it, or in other words, what they approved, the agenda items that they approved. In other words, walk me through the process after the agenda of the Convention of the States has been formalized and drafted to go.
Sure. Certainly, Delegate McComas. So the process begins with the state legislatures adopting resolutions, which do not need to be presented to the governor for signature. Article 5 states that once 2/3 of the states have applied for a convention, then Congress has to call the convention. The convention then takes place. The delegates are appointed by the states according to whatever process they've adopted. That could be the legislatures themselves electing the delegates. That could be the legislatures delegating that authority to the governor of the state or some combination thereof, perhaps the Speaker of the House or the governor or some committee that's appointed for that purpose. That is up to the states themselves to adopt procedures for. The convention meets. The delegates are limited to debating on the topics that have been specified in the applications by the states, and then they propose out amendments. Once those amendments are proposed, Congress then decides how those amendments will be ratified, just as it does with any amendments that it proposes. It can choose to have those amendments ratified either by state legislatures, which has been the process used by Congress in every instance except for prohibition, the repeal of prohibition, or it can send it to state ratifying conventions, which are essentially designed to represent the people more fully. Once that proposal is sent out to the state legislative bodies, 3/4 of the states, or 38 states with our current 50-state country, need to ratify before those amendments become part of the Constitution.
I'm here live in Philadelphia at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. When you hear the phrase lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, these are the folks we should think of, those who anonymously gave their lives. Well, today you have a chance to volunteer. You need to volunteer for conventionofstates.com, the movement that's going to save the country. These folks are willing to step up and give everything. We need you to give just a little bit. Go to conventionofstates.com and volunteer today.